The 586th edition of the Four Corners podcast starts right now.
This is the Four Corners podcast.
Elton ready on his second attempt. That one is no good. They battle for it. Loose ball. Recovered Marvin. He scores. 17 seconds left. And he was fouled. Here we go. Lawson with a runner. No. The rebound. Hansbrough at the gun. Got it.
They were 4 for 24.
Hansbrough on a switch on Paulus. A deep three. And Green rips down the rebound in traffic. 4-on-1.
What a great job. What a terrific job in transition. I mean, you couldn't plan that any better as a coach.
Tipped away by Johnson. It's loose. Page. Johnson.
They're dancing in the aisles. They're high-fiving. They're celebrating. They're going bananas on Franklin Street.
Pass to Britt, 15 seconds to play. Up high to Page, gets a screen from Meeks. Page driving in on the left, high off the glass for two. Louisville with 7 seconds. Jones has it, goes left corner, Black's here for three. Back iron, 1 second to play. Stick up, no! Carolina wins it! The Tar Heels win it! 72-71. 6 seconds to go. Pinson comes front court. Pinson to May for the win. Got it! Luke May! He got it! 0.3 of a second! Luke May gives Carolina the 75-73 lead. Are you kidding me?
Inside 30 overall. Love, top of the key. Oh! Big time delivery.
Here are your hosts, Josh Marlowe and Anthony Pagnotta.
Hello and welcome into another edition of the Four Corners podcast. We are powered by Carolina Electrical Services. Josh and Anthony here with you guys on a Wednesday night. And you notice there's a new intro for the video edition of the podcast. That means that we have officially tipped off it's season 5 of the pod. Usually we would start a new season around, the Hubert Davis Live or whatever Carolina basketball would hold to kind of kick off the year. But that event has kind of gone to the wayside in the NIL era where now they just have a blue-white scrimmage, which has always been the theme of the kickoff event. But now that's just kind of held on a random Saturday. It'll be held next weekend in Chapel Hill. So we've kind of moved our season date up to when practice does begin. And practice officially got started this week in Chapel Hill back on Monday, which is why we are now officially kicking off season 5 of the podcast. And it was crazy to think we've already done 4 seasons, and we're really excited for what we hope is a very fun and successful season 5 for the podcast. Of course, that has to depend on what the team does on the court. Hopefully it's a lot more fun than what we had to go through a year ago. On tonight's edition of the pod, what we're going to do is we're going to tackle the 5 questions Carolina is facing entering the season and what they got to answer in the upcoming season. A lot of stuff we've talked about throughout the duration of the offseason, but now we'll talk about it with practice officially underway. A bunch of news and notes to go over, including a bunch of dates and times being finalized for Carolina in non-con and ACC play. We'll get to all that here in just a minute, but we start every edition of the pod as we always do with the pod thought of the day. And this one, the original thought comes from Harry S. Truman, the former president of the United States. Dean Smith kind of adapted it or kind of altered it to make something that we still use to this day and what Carolina uses on the first day of practice. And that thought is, quote, "It's amazing what can be accomplished when no one cares who gets the credit." And I cannot think of a better quote to use to describe what this team needs to buy into if they want to achieve and experience a lot of success. We've talked a lot about how this is not a star-driven team. Maybe Seth Trimble, Luka Bogovac, Kai and Evans emerge as all ACC caliber players, but it wasn't like the past couple of years when you had an RJ Davis and Armando Bacot, bona fide, ACC player of the year players, guys that could compete to be All-Americans. That does not exist on this roster right now. And so for this team to win and win a lot, it has to be a team that truly buys into the team concept and not care who's getting the praise and the accolades for the success this team may or may not experience on the court this season.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing that we've been looking for over the last few years as well. Even when you had guys like that on the team, you were looking for them to really be selfless when it came to who receives credit for what Carolina's doing. And, I think for the most part, that group was relatively selfless. I think, there were some times, some of the stuff that we heard behind the scenes about RJ Davis and him being bothered by the fact that he was not being listed as a point guard and stuff like that at one time. I think, now you are hoping that with all of those guys gone, with that wave of players gone, so too does the supposed drama behind the scenes, and that this is a group that really is just locked in on playing for every other man on the court, just doing your job and not worrying about who's getting credited for doing their job. I think that's what you're hoping you're getting from this group right now. And it really comes down to the leadership on this team. We're going to talk about that here in a little bit coming up, but I do think that that's the biggest thing that Carolina needs is they need a leader that can lead by example out there on the court, show some of these younger guys what it means to be someone that is, looking out for the betterment of the team, not necessarily looking out for the betterment of themselves. And I think in the NIL era, it is really hard to find these types of players nowadays. So if Carolina can find that type of group this season, it could lead to a lot of success for them.
Let's go ahead and get to the 5 questions that I have listed for what Carolina is facing going into this 2025-2026 campaign. You can maybe say that I listed them from, most important to least important or least important to most important. However, I do think these are the 5 questions they are facing entering the upcoming year. And we'll start with question number 1. The first thing I listed down is, can Carolina get adequate point guard play from Colorado State transfer Kai Evans? This is a guy that, depending on who you listen to get your Carolina takes from, very differing opinions on Kai Evans. If you're a faithful listener to us, and I hope you are, I'm very high on Kai, and I think he is going to be just what the doctor ordered for what this team wants, what this team needs. I love his toughness, love his ability to shoot a high percentage from behind the three-point line. He can get to the rim and finish as well as any guard. I thought it was in the portal this past year, an upgrade, in my opinion, over what you had last year in both Elliot Cadeau and RJ Davis. But there are some people in the Carolina community and some in the national college basketball community that have questions about him as well, trying to make the transition from playing at the Mountain West to playing at Carolina, where you're going to be, scrutinized every time you take the court. Some people think that a lot of the success he enjoyed last year had a lot to do with the backcourt mate he shared with Nick Clifford, a first-round draft pick. But I would argue that he's walking into a better situation at Carolina where there's more all-around talent on this roster than what he had during his time there with the Colorado State Rams. So, I was one that believed that it was the right decision to move on from Elliot Cadeau. I thought that it had become too toxic of a relationship with him and the fan base, with his mom and the fan base, with how she liked to kind of voice her concerns and displeasures on social media. But if he goes to Michigan and balls out, and Kai Evans doesn't prove to be the guy that Carolina hopes he turns out to be, that'll be something we'll be spending a lot of time talking about as the season moves along. So for me, the first question this team has to answer is, can they get adequate point guard play from the transfer Kai Evans?
Yeah, and the reason why this might be the least important of the questions that are being asked is because if it does go wrong, you do have other options that Carolina can go to here. Now, that is certainly not the way that you want things to go. You are hoping that ideally this is the guy that comes in, takes over the position, and he's really good for you, and you don't necessarily have to worry about point guard play for this year or, a couple years down the line. I think that, going into this, I am cautiously optimistic about what he could be, because you look back at last year, and this is another one of those guys that on this roster, him and Jaden Young, very similar type of players in terms of how they finished the year scoring wise, where they were scoring the ball much better down the stretch of the season than they were early in the year. So what are you going to get from Kyan Evans? Are you going to get that consistent player that, what we saw at the end of his time at Colorado State, the guy that can shoot the ball about as well as any point guard that Carolina's had here in a while? Is he a guy that can get to the rim and score it at a pretty high rate as well? Something that Elliot Cadeau at times was able to do, but wasn't able to do consistently enough. I think those are going to be the important things, because that's what's different about his game. He's not going to be a guy that's going to share the basketball as well as Elliot Cadeau could at times. Now, the thing is I think he's going to do a much better job of taking care of the basketball, which I think will allow for better passing of the ball in general, but he's not going to be able to make some of those special passes that we saw Elliot Cadeau make. So he's going to have to make up for that in other ways. I think his shooting, that's what's really going to make up for that. So, for me, it's just about consistency from him. Hopefully we can get a guy that carries over what he did at the end of last year into the start of this season. But even if he does end up finishing this year like he did last year and gets off to a little bit of a slow start, it might not be the worst thing in the world. You do have Seth Trimble that's still here as an option that can be a primary ball handler in certain situations, so you don't have to keep him on the court 30, anywhere from 30 to 35 minutes per game. You've got other options that you can go to that can help him out, but you're really hoping that the shooting is something that's there really from the beginning for him. So I think he is going to be able to give Carolina adequate point guard play. But the thing is that the demands here at Carolina is probably a little bit more than adequate. So we'll see how he settles into the situation and if he can turn this into good point guard play, which I think would be enough from him with some of the other guys that Carolina has on this roster.
Yeah, I just think he's a natural fit for what Hubert Davis asked out of his point guards. And if there's something that you can tell that there's a distinct difference from Roy Williams to Hubert Davis, he wants his point guard to be a scorer. If they can make plays for others, that's great. But when this team has played at its best is when you've had a lead guard that could score the ball. Kyan Evans can do that, and he's confident in his abilities to do that. I cannot wait to see what this young man looks like in Carolina blue. The second question was the biggest talking point we had about a year ago. But, you come into this year and it's still going to be maybe the thing we talk about the most initially. But if Carolina has adequate point guard play, you can maybe overcome deficiencies in the front court. But that's the second question is, did Carolina fix their front court issues from a year ago? You can't deny that they haven't exhausted the ability to answer that question with the resounding yes, because of how many newcomers in the front court enter the program. Incoming transfer from Arizona, Henry Visar. You got Jaren Stevenson. You've got him from Alabama. You bring in a top 10 recruit in Caleb Wilson, a guy that is, from a talent perspective, the most talented player on the roster. You go down to Ivan Matlakovich, the transfer from High Point. If you want to count Jonathan Powell as a front court player, the wing from West Virginia. You can add him to that equation as well. More importantly, Luka Mogovac, the international pro that joined the roster from Montenegro this offseason as well. Carolina was able to identify they had a weakness, and they were able to figure out a way to turn that weakness into what a lot of people believe, including John Rothstein from CBS Sports. He thinks now the front court could be the strength of Carolina in 2005, 2026. And I think this is going to be something that we will monitor all season long. We'll get a good look at what this front court looks like when they go off against BYU in an exhibition. You've got the second home game against Kansas, which is where you could tell last year that Carolina's front court was exposed when they were on the road and getting beat by 20 by a Jayhawk team that was arguably the worst that Bill Self has ever coached during his story time there in Lawrence. So the second question for Carolina that they're facing, and this one that I think we'll be able to tell early on if this a yes or a no, is did they fix the front court issues that plagued them all season long last year?
Yeah, to me, I think the answer is yes. I think they went out and got the big man in the middle that they've been lacking in Henry Vasar. I think he, has adequate backup help there at the 5. Whether you want James Brown to be that guy, whether you want Zayden High to eventually be that guy, or Ivan Matalakovic is also an option that Carolina has that's 7 foot. So size-wise, I think you've taken care of that. Then you've got, that 4 spot where you could go with Caleb Wilson, a little bit smaller potentially than what he measured in at 6'10", although that is with basketball shoes and in some cases orthotics, according to the team website. So he could play at 6'10" and still have pretty good height on him. Jaren Stevenson's a guy that Carolina has the ability to, move around, play with a little bit in that front court, potentially a guy that could start for them if needed at some point this season. And then if you're lumping in guys like Jonathan Powell and Luka Bogovac into the front court, then yeah, I think you are certainly looking at this and saying this is probably the strength of Carolina's roster, because at that point, I mean, the only other guys that you're really talking about on the roster that we know for sure are going to be major contributors for Carolina are Seth Trimble and Kyan Evans. Everybody else is kind of a little bit of a question mark right now. So if that is the front court and we're not considering Bogovac and Jonathan Powell as guards, then I think, yeah, this front court is definitely the strength of this team. I would agree with John Rothstein, and they have definitely taken care of business in this front court. This looks like a much more competitive group. It's a team that should be able to rebound a lot easier, especially early in the season. Last year, that was really where Carolina saw their biggest struggles rebounding the basketball, was in the early season matchups that really dashed the confidence of that team. I think this year you're going to have guys that can rebound on the inside, but more importantly, you've got guys that can score the ball, I think, at a pretty nice rate on the inside. Now, Vasar, definitely a guy that's going to have to take a step up from his production that he had at Arizona, where they're going to be expecting him to play a little bit more. Jaren Stevenson, you're looking for a little bit more consistency, maybe a little more at the rim too from him, as opposed to just being a guy that stands out and stretches the floor most of the time. And then you're looking for pretty big contributions from a guy in Caleb Wilson, who comes in as a top 10 recruit and has some massive upside. I think, all these guys will be able to sort of live up to the expectations that we have going right now for them. And if they do that, then I think Carolina's in for a pretty strong season.
Yeah, I was reading what Adam Lucas wrote for GoHeels.com about the first day of practice, and he just said, look, there were plays that Caleb Wilson and Henry Vasar were making that Carolina just simply could not make a year ago, because they didn't have the size, the athleticism, and so I think it's like it's fair to expect that to maybe become the strength of your team, because if you think Luka Bogovac is going to be the leading scorer, which I think it's maybe fair to expect a 21-year-old international pro to be your best scorer. Caleb Wilson is the best talent on your roster, and then Vasar, I think, is a big man that if Carolina uses correctly, could even be more of a force than he was at Arizona. Then I do think that becomes the strength of this team, which I think would be a godsend for a backcourt that has to find its footing with a transfer like Kyan Evans and with Seth Trimble going to have to acclimate to, being a guy that's going to be on the scouting report every single night as someone that they'll look to try to take away what he does from the offensive end of the floor. Speaking of Seth Trimble, that's where we go for question number 3. Talked so much last year about a lack of leadership, and it was evident, and it was apparent, and it was something that really held this team back, or that team back, from really reaching whatever success was attainable. The short story is, your preseason number 9 in the country. You should not be the last team in the tournament having to go to play to Dayton and being knocked out on the round of 64. But that was the reality of the situation. And a big reason why is when things went sideways, when When crap hit the fan, there was no one there to hold them accountable. And that conversation got uncomfortable throughout the season because it got to the point where you had to give R.J. Davis a lot of the blame because he was the fifth-year player. He was the 2,000-point scorer. He was the preseason All-ACC Player of the Year, preseason All-American, but he wasn't leading with his voice. You saw glimpses of Seth Trimble throughout the year wanting to be the vocal leader, but admitted in his press conference that just wasn't comfortable being that with some of the guys on the roster. But after the loss at Clemson, went very much after his teammates. You go to the loss to Ole Miss in the NCAA tournament, the loss that ended RJ's career. Who was the guy that was most visibly upset and frustrated that the season was over? It was Seth Trimble. And so, when he decided to come back, and the decision to come back was really once he decided not to transfer, it was evident that this leadership burden was going to fall on his shoulders. And he talked a lot about it last week, and he feels like he's ready and he's equipped to be the leader because he's always been a leader, but playing behind guys like RJ, Armando, Cormac, and Ingram, he didn't feel comfortable leading. But I think we're about to find out if he's equipped to be the leader this team needs him to be on and off the court, because if Carolina has someone they can look to when the going gets tough, it's going to make a bigger difference than you think, because last year they did not have that guy on the court.
Yeah, it didn't feel like it. RJ Davis certainly wasn't the guy that we thought he was going to be for Carolina. And, there were still moments in time where he was able to sort of lead by example. But this is what you're hoping you're going to see from Seth Trimble, is a guy that really, when the team needs him, when they count on him to make shots for Carolina, when they count on someone to hold the other guys on the floor accountable and be a vocal presence, that he is the guy that can do all of that stuff. And that's a lot to put on his plate. And I'm going to be honest with you. The answer to this question is I don't know, because I think this is probably the one that I feel the least confident in out of the answers that I have for this question, because I just don't know. We didn't see it last year from him. And when you didn't see it from a guy that was on the team last year, you really question whether or not he's going to be the leader this year on this team. What's different about this year? I guess it's that RJ Davis isn't there, so maybe he feels like he has more reason to step up and be a leader, and maybe that comes out in him. But you would have liked to see him take over that role again last year, when Carolina was lacking that vocal presence on the floor. They need an extension of the coach out there. That's what they need. They need someone that's going to bring the same type of energy that Hubert Davis is bringing in some of these huddles out to the court. And I think that Seth Trimble is capable of doing that. I think he knows what it takes to be a leader. I mean, look at some of the stuff that he's already doing, outside of basketball. That shows really good leadership, that he's already stepping up and taking charge of his life. What is going to happen after basketball and everything like that. So now you want to see that translate onto the court. I think he can be that guy. I think he will end up being that guy that people look towards, but just how vocal is he going to be? That's going to be the big question for Carolina, because the lead by example stuff, I really think that he is going to look much different this year in terms of the way that he plays. I think you're going to see him look a lot more like what we saw early last season, as opposed to what we saw post-concussion. I don't think he was ever right after the concussion. I do think, and that's not to say that Carolina forced him back out there or anything like that, but it just felt like once the season got off track for him, he was never really able to get back to what he was early in the season in terms of the way that he shot the ball and everything of that nature. I think he's going to be a guy that's going to shoot it a lot better this year. He's going to be able to score it more consistently for Carolina this year. And I've said it, I think there's a decent chance that he is the guy that ends up leading this team in scoring this year, because he knows that he has to step his game up. And I think he can really take it to another level. We saw it last year when RJ Davis was out of the scrimmage against Memphis. He took over the game and went off. I think you could see, not that every single night, of course, but you could see that type of mindset taken throughout the season, especially in certain games. And that's what could allow him to be the team's leading scorer when the season is all said and done. So I think that's probably the biggest way that he can lead this team this year is by being, a leader by example. But I would like to see him definitely step up into that vocal role and be someone that holds guys accountable on the floor, that can settle things down on the floor, something that last year Carolina was never really able to do when they would get into some of those bad stretches. You would look to see who is the guy that's really trying to settle this group down, and there was no one that was able to do it. Hopefully this year, things are a little different with Seth Trimble leading the way.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with having a leader by example on the court, and every team, I think, needs one. Every team needs an extension of their core, of their coach on the court, and they did not have that a year ago. I think he's primed to be that because I think he wants to be that. I'll still push back on if he ends up being this team's leading scorer. I think that spells doom for Carolina and not a positive thing. And I could be completely wrong. Maybe that guy that we saw that scored 30 at Memphis, maybe that's who he could truly be on a night in, night out basis, being that explosive of a scorer. I don't think that's who he is on a night in, night out basis. I think he is much more of a defensive minded guard that'll make his points, getting to the rim, getting to the free throw line, living in that mid-range area, maybe shooting 37, 38%. But in my eyes, he's taken 8 to 10, maybe 12 shots a game. I think this offense is going to facilitate better through Bogovac, Wilson, Kai, and Evans as opposed to running through Seth Trimble. Let's get to Caleb Wilson. He is question number 4. And you hate to put this burden of expectation upon someone that hasn't played a single second of collegiate basketball. But, when you're a top 10 recruit, there comes some burden. And quite frankly, when you have talked as much as he has talked about being the guy that's going to be helping restore the program to prominence, then it only adds that weight and that pressure. Oh, by the way, he plays the most important position for when Carolina is good. He's going to play the stretch 4. And when Carolina has gotten really good play from that position, Brady Manick, Harrison Ingram, you saw how good Carolina was. When they haven't gotten the type of production from that position, Pete Nance, who I just thought they misused, and then last year they quite literally didn't have a stretch 4 on the roster. It was basically a group that was 4 guards with a 1 big man. You saw how much Carolina struggled. But now you're bringing in a 6'10 guy that can play inside out, can shoot the 3, can rebound, defend, block shots at the rim, do everything and more that you did not have at that position a year ago. There's no denying that he's confident. You can argue maybe a little cocky and a little arrogant, but I think this team could use a little bit of that as well. But I think question number 4 is, can Caleb Wilson live up to the expectations of being a top 10 recruit? Because the track record shows that when Carolina has a difference maker at that position, the chances of them making the tournament and competing for a national championship are a lot higher than them being a team that's on the bubble come Selection Sunday.
Yeah, and that's in the modern era. Of course, we're not going back to when Roy Williams was here and saying that the 4 spot was really the difference. But with Hubert, it has been the difference. You talked about the 2 guys that when they came in here and had a high level of play out of that position, everything was different for Carolina. And I mean, with Brady Manick, it wasn't immediate. But once he turned it on, it was completely different for Carolina. It opened up so much on the offensive end, and really what he brought defensively as well was a game changer for Carolina. I think with Caleb Wilson, all of the tools are there. This is a guy that can score it from just about anywhere on the floor. I love the back to the basket game. I do think that's an element that probably doesn't get talked about nearly enough when it comes to his game. A lot of people that were wanting to put him at the 3 and go with a really big lineup for Carolina when it looked like Carolina wasn't going to get a wing player before they went out and got Luka Bogovac. I think that was a little bit crazy because I do think his back to the basket game really is that good and is one of his strengths. But also, I mean, he's a really good defender. You go back to that All-American game that he played in, and everybody was questioning, why did he not look great offensively? Well, there were so many guys on the court that night that were there to score. He didn't really get nearly the opportunities that he's going to get even at Carolina because everybody was really hunting their own shot. not him, and he's clearly not a primary ball handler, but the one thing that he did do was he defended at a really high level. He can defend anywhere from the 4 to the 2, potentially could even defend at his size the 5 position if he wants to. Although, hearing that in his intro video, he said he was 6'7", maybe that concerns you a little bit if you're trying to see him in that role. But I think anywhere from the 4 to the 2, he's going to be able to guard that for you and be able to do it at a really high level. This one feels important. This one feels like you need this one to hit, because you look at some of the 5 stars that you have brought in here, and it just does not seem like they are hitting the way that they need to here under Hubert Davis. So you need one of these guys to actually be to live up to the preseason expectations that they bring to the table. This is a guy that, as the summer has gone along, as we've seen what he's been doing in practice, the hype has really started to grow. And he's going to be a guy that going into the year, there are going to be a lot of people nationally talking about what he could potentially be. Carolina needs him to live up to those expectations and be one of the top players in the sport, really one of the top freshmen in the sport, mainly, even if he's not a guy that's fighting for, the Wooden Award or something like that, and really be a key piece for them on both ends of the floor this year. I think he's capable of it. I think the fact that he's dominating these guys already shows where he's at and how good of a player he really is. But you never really know until we get into the season. So it's going to be up to him to be able to live up to the hype that he's really setting for himself, as you mentioned, with some of the comments that he has been, letting out there during the offseason.
All right, the last question that Carolina has to answer this season, and it's been what we have talked about, quite literally since the middle of the season a year ago, is what does Hubert Davis have to do to ensure he's Carolina's head coach this time next year? Had he made a deep tournament run this last March, this would not be a topic of conversation. But going out in the round of 64, even when you technically do win a tournament game because you won a game in Dayton, that did not do enough to quiet the noise. And Hubert admitted that when he met with the media a few weeks ago. It's one of the reasons why I'm hoping I get a chance to interview him at ACC tip-off here in a few weeks, because that's the first time he's really publicly acknowledged the pressure that he feels and has to carry as being the head coach of Carolina basketball, and also understanding that, every program except Duke would take what this man has accomplished and achieved during his 4 years. But the fact of the matter is the roller coaster here isn't what we expect. It's not going to be tolerated. It's supposed to be sustained excellence. And so far, Hubert has failed to meet that. And hopefully this year is really the year where he finds his footing as Carolina's head coach and is going to be on the sidelines for the next 15 to 20 years. But for that to happen, he has to accomplish some pretty big time things, I think, this upcoming year. But I'll do the honors of letting you answer this question first, because I think my demands might be higher than yours. So what do you think Hubert Davis has to guide this program to guarantee himself he's on the bench next year?
Yeah, to me, I don't think that things are nearly as drastic for the administration as it is for the fan base. I think for the fan base, the belief is that he really has a lot to do. He has to make a deep tournament run. He's got to be contending for an ACC regular season title, if not win it, in order to be here next year. The thing is that, again, we've looked around and we've said this so many times before. Who are you going to hire if Hubert Davis is no longer the guy and you are moving on? Unless you are dead set on going outside of the family. And even then, you got to look around and you got to know the market that you've got. You've got to already know that there are people that are interested in the job that are worthy candidates of replacing a guy like Hubert Davis and doing that by going outside of the family. These have to be really impressive candidates. So I think for Carolina, the administration is going to go in thinking, look, we need to see some consistency from you, but we don't need you to necessarily be it's not national championship or bust. It's not Final Four or bust, and we're moving on. It's for him. I think if you look at this season, you find a way to make the NCAA tournament field comfortably, which means that you are anywhere from a 6 seed up, then I think you're probably looking at this and saying, okay, this is probably a successful regular season. From there, I think you would have to win at least one game in the NCAA tournament. It really depends on what your draw is in that next game. But I think as long as there is not an upset, and as long as it's not a 6 versus a 14 seed or something like that, or any of the other math, if you go with the higher seeds, then I think that Carolina will probably be satisfied with what they get from their head coach, and they will say that he will stick around. Now, would it be that they are thrilled with what he's doing? No, probably not. And if there was some success from, let's say, a guy like Wes Miller all of a sudden, and he started to put together he finds a way to put together a couple of really strong seasons, and this is back-to-back years where Hubert Davis is really just getting Carolina comfortably into the tournament and they're bowing out in the second round, then maybe you start to have those conversations. But for me, I think this year, that's really what you want to see from him is get to that second round, be comfortably in the NCAA tournament field, not talking about this team on the bubble. And I think that will be enough to keep him around as Carolina's head coach in 2026, 2027.
Yeah, I'm not telling you this is what I'm expecting. But I do think for him to feel comfortable, confident that he doesn't have to go into a meeting and, make the case for why he should be Carolina's head coach. The only way this does not become a talking point is if 3 things happen. Carolina wins the ACC regular season tournament or the ACC regular season title. They win an ACC tournament title, or they make the second weekend of the NCAA tournament. Outside of that, I think if this team finishes 4th in the ACC and they bow out in the round of 32, I think there's a conversation to be had. I think if they finish 5th in the ACC and they go home in the round of 64, I think there's a conversation to be had. Whether this is right or wrong, I don't know. He has to beat Duke, I think, in some capacity as well. You got swept by them last year in a year where you played them 3 times. And, outside of a ferocious comeback against them in the ACC tournament, 2 of the 3 games weren't even competitive. You were getting blown out and ran off the court against your rival in 2 of the 3 games. And, as much as that rivalry has been devalued by the national media, it's still the biggest game in college basketball when those 2 teams meet on the court, whether it's in Durham, Chapel Hill, or a neutral floor in Charlotte. So I do think he at least has to split with Duke in the regular season as well. But I do think because of the roller coaster combined with the fact that he has missed the tournament with the preseason number 1 team, I do think puts a little bit more on stake than what you are saying. I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I think if this team wins 25 plus games, they finish top 3 in the league, and he wins at least 1 game in the tournament, I would have seen enough to be comfortable with him coming back for next season. I just think with where Carolina is at, you're bringing in a new AD that is going to see things a lot differently than Bubba Cunningham. Like, you're bringing in a true outsider, from a guy that's been in NASCAR for the last 10 to 15 years, as opposed to a guy like Bubba who, as he is prepared to step away from his role, does feel like Carolina. The guy that comes in does not feel like Carolina at all. He has all the ties he can have to the university as he wants. He does not feel like someone that feels like a part of the Tar Heel community. And if he thinks that Hubert isn't doing enough really for the program to be the best financially that it can be, I do think he will be a lot more open to making a move at the head coaching position. Again, I'm not saying that's my opinion, but I do think he has to achieve at a pretty high level to ensure this is not a conversation when the season comes to an end in March or April.
Yeah, the Steve Newkirk angle of it is certainly interesting. I think that is a guy that's going to come in here. He's going to want to make his own hires. I think with football, you're comfortable with where you're at right now because he was part of the advisory group that did end up hiring Bill Belichick, but he wasn't involved in the hire of Hubert Davis. So for him, yeah, he's probably eager to make his own hire. Now, I would caution anybody that is a Tar Heel basketball fan to just jump in on that. Now, if you're one of those people that thinks that going outside of the family is the right way to go, well, then you should be all in on this. You should be hoping that Hubert Davis fails this season and that Steve Newkirk is the guy that really gets to push for the new hire, because then he's probably going to go outside of the family. If you're someone that wants to keep the traditions of Carolina basketball alive, then you should be rooting for Hubert Davis. You should be wanting this to be a success. Or if not, you should at least want it to be successful enough to where you can get a look at Wes Miller. You can get a look at some of these other potential family candidates that Carolina has and maybe eventually hire one of those guys. I think, to me, the administration, I don't know if they're quite there just yet. I don't think the Board of Trustees is really pushing for there to be a change, not nearly the way that they were pushing when it came to the football side of things, where they wanted Mac Brown out of there. They wanted somebody else to come in, and eventually they went with Bill Belichick and decided that they were going to put all the money that they possibly could towards that. I don't know if they're going to do the same thing with Hubert Davis. I do think there are probably still some people that do believe in Hubert, especially because of the success that he had in his first season. I think that really is going to buy him a little bit of leeway. So to me, that's why I think as long as you comfortably make the tournament, as long as you win a tournament game, and again, it really all depends on what it looks like. If this is a team that ends up finishing as a 2-3 seed, entering the NCAA tournament, well, then, yeah, the expectation is for you to get to the second weekend. But let's say that you enter as a 6 seed and you draw a really tough 3 seed, probably would be, with the history that we know with Carolina when it comes to getting some of these draws, they probably would draw the toughest 3 seed out there. And then, yeah, to a certain extent, depending on what ends up happening in the game and how it looks, I think Hubert would be fine. But again, that's just my opinion. Maybe this is the thing. We have no idea because they are not coming out and saying, they're not laying out what exactly Hubert Davis has to do. They're not going to do that for us. So we don't know how exactly they're feeling. But in my mind, I feel like just based off of the fact that it doesn't seem to be a lot of buzz around wanting to move on from him as a head coach outside of the fan base itself, I think that's probably the reason why I still think that would be enough to ensure that Hubert Davis is here in 2026. But maybe I'm wrong, man. Maybe I'm wrong.
I think the one thing we can both agree on is I don't think he can afford to, one, miss the tournament for a second time in 5 years.
No, at that point, I wouldn't say that I would say it's 50-50. He misses the NCAA tournament, it's probably 50-50. There's a chance they move on. There's a chance they stick with them. But
I don't see how you can keep a coach that, yes, has made a title game, won a conference title, but you can't miss 2 tournaments in 5 years at North Carolina. You can't. And with one of those tournaments being preseason number 1 team, this one is going to be preseason ranked, probably in the back teens, maybe even the 20s. There's going to be a number beside their name because it's North Carolina. People are going to vote for them because of just who their name is. Yeah. But you can't miss 2 tournaments in 5 years. And I think if he finds himself on the bubble for a 4th time in 5 years and this team goes 1 and done in March, it really makes that conversation more likely than it would be at 85% of schools in the sport. But
yeah, I'd like to change it. I think if he's on the bubble, then it's 50-50. If he ends up missing the tournament, then it's pretty much a sure thing that he's gone. The problem is, and the only reason why there might be some hesitance is because, again, if they are wanting to stick in the family, and that could be something that Jim Tanner sort of pushes as the GM, there is not a great candidate. There is not a Roy Williams that's here.
Nope,
Like if
there's
there was
not.
a Roy Williams that's here, I would be where you were probably at in terms of what the expectations are for this season. I think he would have to win something pretty significant in order to be able to hold on to his job. But because you don't have that, I think that there is that a little bit of runway still left for Hubert that allows him to maybe, as we said, make the NCAA tournament, but be on the bubble and exit, in the first round again and still hold on to the job. But at that point, I mean, his seat would be blazing hot coming into the next season.
Which is why, folks, it's in the best interest that Hubert Davis wins and wins big, and you get on the Hubert Davis support train and help cheer him on to that success. So we're not having those hard conversations in March or April of next season. That's a look at the 5 biggest questions facing Carolina ahead of the 2025-2026 season. We'll now get you out of here with a handful of news and notes. We mentioned at the top of the show with the annual blue-white scrimmage. That'll be held Saturday, October 4th in the Smith Center, roughly 1 hour after the conclusion of the UNC Clemson football game. That's a noon kick for Carolina in Kenan Stadium. So you could expect the scrimmage to start around probably 4:30, 5 o'clock in the Smith Center next Saturday afternoon. So if you haven't already done so, be locked in with us here at the Heel Tough blog from the website perspective and the Heel Tough blog and Four Corners podcast, because next Saturday will be a content overload from Carolina football and Carolina basketball. We mentioned that Carolina's got some dates and some times for some games this upcoming year. Their game at Kentucky in the ACC-SEC Challenge will come your way December 2nd with a tip-off of 9:30 p.m. on the mothership over on ESPN. Not surprised that blue blood rivalry getting the later tip that night, as Carolina will look to earn a marquee non-conference win at their old rivals from the SEC. And remember, we went through the ACC schedule a few weeks ago, but a handful of games did not have dates that were official. Now those dates are made official. So the game against Florida State will come your way December 30th, so not New Year's Eve. It'll be New Year's Eve. Their game at Stanford will come your way January 14th. Their game at home against Notre Dame will come January 21st. The 14th and the 21st, both those games are on a Wednesday. Their games at NC State and Miami. At Miami, February 10th. At NC State, February 14th. Both of those games are on a Tuesday. Same with the game against Clemson, which will be senior night. That'll come your way on March 3rd. But now the ACC schedule is officially finalized, so it makes it easier for you to buy the games that you want to buy for, whether the games are in Carolina or if you want to make road trips to some of the new places Carolina is playing at this ACC season. And the last note, a bit of recruiting news, some positive recruiting news for Carolina. They did make the top 5 for 2026 5-star prospect Cole Kluwer. He released that information back, I believe, on Monday. And Carolina's been very active. They've had a bunch of guys come to campus. Some guys have unfortunately canceled their visits, but for the most part, Carolina's still in a really good spot, I think, to land some marquee recruits in the 2026 class. And with Cole Kluwer having them in their top 5, he becomes a big priority for Hubert Davis and his staff in that all-important recruiting cycle. With that, guys, this is going to wrap up this edition of the show. In the meantime, we will direct you guys to the website, HeelToughBlog.com. It's a bye week for Carolina football, but a lot of news coming out of the program. We got a health update on quarterback Gio Lopez. 2 more players have left the program, and Anthony has you covered on all that information. Any other information that comes out of the Kenan Football Center, he'll have you covered on that front. Same thing with me on the Carolina basketball front, as well as now that practice is underway, our preseason basketball content will begin to make its way to the website. As for the podcast, you guys know where to find us. Every major podcasting platform, simply search the Four Corners Podcast. We'll pop up. There, we encourage you guys to rate, review, and subscribe. That way you don't miss any editions of the audio versions. As for the video, to make sure you get notified when we go live, like and follow us at Heel Tough Blog on Facebook and on YouTube, and at my personal Twitter account, HTBJosh. That's where it streams at on Twitter. If you like and follow those pages, you will be notified the second that we go live on the video editions. So we encourage you guys to do that as well. That is going to wrap up, though, this edition of the podcast. I do thank Anthony once again for hosting with me. We want to thank you guys for watching and listening. And as always, go Tar Heels.